Welcome to another episode of Progress, Potential, and Possibilities, discussions with fascinating people designing a better tomorrow for all of us. I'm your host, Ira Pastor.
Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of our show, bringing you not one, but two fascinating guests today involved in creating a better tomorrow for so many people out there. As a little background, the University Kidney Research Organization is a Los Angeles-based nonprofit charity. It was co-founded by prominent entertainment attorney Kenneth Kleinberg, inspired by his own personal journey with kidney disease, and it's focused on supporting medical research and education related to the causes, the treatments, and ultimately the eradication of all forms of kidney disease. Once again, two great guests. First, we're joined by Dr. Andy McMahon, director of the Eli and Edith Broad Center for Regenerative Medicine and Stem Cell Research at USC, provost professor and the inaugural holder of the W.M. Keck Professorship of Stem Cell Biology and Regenerative Medicine, and he's responsible for overseeing UKRO's Synthetic Kidney Project. In addition, Dr. McMahon chairs the recently created Department of Stem Cell Biology and Regenerative Medicine at the Keck School. Previously, Dr. McMahon served as a professor in the Department of Stem Cell and Regenerative Biology in the Department of Molecular and Cellular Biology, and principal faculty member at the Harvard Stem Cell Institute, as well as leading the Department of Cell and Developmental Biology at the Roche Institute for Molecular Biology. He received his undergrad bachelor's from St. Peter's College, Oxford University, his Ph.D. from University College of London, and worked for several years as a postdoc at Caltech. We are also joined by Louis Kleinberg, board member of UKRO, son of Kenneth Kleinberg, who is a writer, producer, has written, developed, and produced numerous projects for organizations like Sony Pictures, Walt Disney Pictures, 21st Century Fox, just to name a few. He currently creates and produces a variety of films for UKRO, their website, their media outreach, the benefit dinners. He's a graduate of the USC School of Cinematic Arts. He serves as an advisor to Donate Life Hollywood, as well as a mentor for USC's Compass program, which helps support undergraduate students pursuing various careers in regenerative medicine. This is going to be an awesome show. Honored to have both of them. Dr. Andy McMahon, Louis Kleinberg, thank you so much for taking the time to come on the show.
Delighted to be here, Ira.
Absolutely.
Great having both of you. I'd love to start off. I'll go to Louis first. Louis, I'd like to hear just a little bit about your background story, and then, of course, if you could say a few words about your father. I think all of us watching this and around the world, we all know family members that have chronic degenerative diseases, but very few of us ultimately end up funding major research institutions to deal with them. Talk a little bit about, your background, but of course, your father.
Well, I'd really like to start with my dad's background, what his story really is, because this started about 20 years ago. He, as you said, is a prominent entertainment attorney, still is, but he contracted a kidney malady that had no known cause or cure, and that is still the case. He sort of blew up like a balloon with 30 pounds of water weight. It was diagnosed initially as something called minimal change disease. But he really needed some further help. And we were fortunate to be introduced to a great nephrologist at USC named Dr. Vito Campisi. And Dr. Campisi basically said to my dad, look, I don't care if you become my patient, but you got to go in the hospital. They put him in the hospital. They gave him Lasix, and the water weight kind of came out. This went on for about, he sort of nursed the kidney along for a couple of years until it happened again. He was then diagnosed with something called FSGS, which is a a further and sort of worse version of it. He lost kidney function, was put on dialysis in, I believe, 2002 or 2001, I'm sorry, 2000, and did 6.5 years on dialysis, ultimately got a transplant. But it was during this time of his illness that he and, just to correct you a little bit on the intro, he and Dr. Campisi together founded Eucara. We sort of found out, I mean, we were people who knew very little about nephrology, about kidney disease, but you find out that 1 in 6 or 7 people actually have a variety of kidney disease. And he was sort of dumbfounded that, well, how is it possible? This was, this will date it a little bit, but it was around the millennium, and the idea that we were getting to a millennium, but we still had these questions and no answers at all about something like kidney disease that affected so many people. The two of them decided to do something about it. And so Eucara was founded in 2002 at USC, where Dr. Campisi was the chairman of hypertension and nephrology.
Excellent. Excellent. And Andy, looking at your extensive publication history, and I've gone to all about 1,000 of your publications in PubMed, but they are really chock full of literally every morphogen, transcription factor, Hox genes, adherins, cadherins, sonic hedgehog, all the fascinating biochemical language that guide cells what to become, where they should go, how to interact with other cells, when to stop growing. And I'm bringing this up not just to set the stage to what we're going to be getting into with the synthetic kidney project, but a little bit about, thinking back to sort of stem cell, sort of the first generation, where a lot of it was, the thought was we're going to take these cells, we're going to throw them in and walk away, and new kidneys and everything will pop up. Realizing there's a little more that goes into, regenerative medicine. Talk a little bit about sort of the history here, because you see very early on, even when you were doing your Ph.D., studying the germline of mouse, you were studying these all important components of the regenerative picture, even back in the early 90s. Talk a little bit about that, if you would.
Well, that's a great career summary, Ira. I couldn't have done it better. So I've worked on a diversity of our body systems and a diversity of different organisms to understand basic concepts in how you generate the right cell types. You make them in the right places, you make them in the right numbers, and you keep them happy and healthy throughout life. Before I came to USC, I was at Harvard for 19 years in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences there. And I would say that my research there was mostly academic and of academic interest. And it sort of suited the environment of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, where people are asking sort of penetrating fundamental questions. And then when I decided to move to USC in 2012 and to the medical school, I thought, now there's a time to think about my research in a different way. And we had been working on the kidney and trying to understand how the kidney is put together during development and how it's repaired and regenerated when injured, sort of like as a side project in the lab. But I saw the opportunity of coming to USC and into a medical environment with a keen interest in doing something important in this area to really just focus my entire group now onto the kidney as our central problem.
Excellent. Louis, let's talk a little bit about the organization sort of broadly, because, we go to the site, you have, all the important data that we typically hear about when we talk about chronic kidney disease, millions of U.S. adults, $30 billion just between transplant and dialysis in the United States, another $30 billion internationally. It is an area that, I can say, just having spent time in the pharma industry, we spend very little money on. The rejection drugs that we have, are from decades ago still. Talk about the organization broadly. You do a lot more than, obviously funding Andy's Holy Grail project, which we'll be getting into. Talk about the model, a little bit of where the funding comes from, the type of funding mechanisms that you use, and so forth.
Well, I mean, we began, as I said, in about 2002 and spent about 10 years actually kind of building up making connections, putting together a board of directors, and building our resources to be able to ultimately create a kidney research center at USC.
Okay.
And that timed out almost perfectly with Andy's arrival at USC. We founded it in 2012. They've been our partner all along, and that's helped, of course, a lot to draw attention to the work. Insofar as where our money comes from and how we raise money, we obviously do events on an annual basis. So we honor various people. We have tried very hard to honor deserving people, people who have achieved a great deal in science and medicine, as well as leaders, philanthropic leaders in the community here in Los Angeles. And, obviously we attempt to get the word out through programs like yours here so that the broader public has an idea and a sort of a dog in the fight. Again, if 1 in 6 of us has kidney disease, then it's pretty easy to go to the grocery store and look at the line and just know that, without knowing it, many of these people have kidney disease or will. And there are so few treatments ultimately at the end stage. You mentioned the two that really exist now, and those are dialysis, which my father was on for 6 years, and a transplant. And the thing of dialysis is that it really, people don't know what it is. I mean, we have a board member who has said, I passed by these dialysis centers, daily without actually knowing what went on in there until it was my turn. And I had to go in there out of necessity because I lost my kidneys. And dialysis, Andy can correct me on this, but I believe it does something along the order of 15% of what your normal kidneys do. It basically keeps you going. Mm-hmm. And that's, I'm not sure how much more, Andy, do you want to address that?
Well, yes. So it's it's a minimalist therapeutic approach to just keep the patient in a healthy enough state that the patients can maintain a life. But it isn't doing many of the complex things that the kidney does, and those patients have to be supplemented with a variety of other medicines to actually treat that. So, for example, aside from just maintaining the balance of body fluids, which is the central function of the kidney, and that's really what the dialysis is addressing. Your kidneys regulate your blood cells. They regulate your blood pressure. And all of these things are complications that have to be secondarily treated when your kidneys start to lose function and activities. So dialysis is sort of the best we can do, but it's a very, very poor substitute for what the real organ does.
Well, let's please.
I'm just saying, and Lewis can no doubt speak to this much better than me. The amount of time that the patient's on dialysis, how those patients feel during that time, and a lot of these patients are losing kidney function late in life, and so it's a particularly difficult time where those people have loss of energy and the sickness that one feels if one's just on a dialysis-based therapy.
For sure. I mean, you feel, I personally have not been on dialysis. I feel fortunate that that's the case, but to have a family member or someone close that you're close to, it is quite debilitating. It's hours on the machine, and the patient is tired afterward, and it can affect someone's life. If one has to travel, one has to arrange for dialysis in other cities or even countries, and it's not easy. So, finding a solution which is better than the up to 10-year wait for a transplant is crucial. And it's something that this great project that Andy is involved with and that we'll talk about, I assume, that directly addresses it.
Let's go there now, because I think that this is obviously it's as I talked about it before, sort of a holy grail type thing, and just to sort of set the stage, because our audience has has heard stories from folks like Tony Atala, who's bioprinting, and Doris Taylor, who's working on decellularization, recellularization, sort of what I look at as sort of top-down approaches to generating organs. What you're doing is quite different. I mean, you're what I'll look at as bottom up. If we look at your Nature 2021 paper, Generation of Pattern Kidney Organoids that recapitulate adult kidney collecting duct system from expandable ureteric blood progenitors, you really, not just are dealing with organoids in culture, but also studying how certain types of organoids, in the case of the uretic bud, can be generated from other organoids in the collecting duct. You introduce the concept as one of the mysteries in biology of intercalation, about if there's cells 1 and 2 and cells 4 and 5, they figure out there should be a 3 somewhere. Walk us through a little bit about when you say synthetic kidney, what the project is all about, and then we'll dive down into some of the sort of details about different types of cells and production methods and all that.
Okay, well, it's actually much simpler than it sounds, and I have to here introduce Songwei Li, and just to actually put a little bit more insight into UKRO and their activities here at USC. When I came to USC, I met Lewis and Ken early on, and we decided that it was really important to be able to recruit new faculty and build up this as a real strength at USC. And so they've been instrumental in helping recruit Songwei Li here. And it's Songwei who's the intellectual force that spearheaded these projects. So I'm speaking on behalf of him here in some of the great steps that have been made. So it's really quite simple. If you just look at the building blocks that go into making the kidney, there are 4 different types of stem progenitor-like cells.
Okay.
And these are just next to one another as the kidney starts out its developmental life in the early embryo, and their interactions with each other sort of set in motion a self-organizing process that goes on for weeks or months.
Yep.
That in the end leads to that functional organ. And the strategy that Songwei has been taking has been to work out approaches using special types of stem cells, pluripotent stem cells, to perfect making these progenitors, to then be able to combine them as they combine together during embryonic life, and then to just let them read out the instructions that they have to generate this complex system. So you're absolutely right. It's a sort of a bottom-up approach that says, okay, all we need to do is get the right cells there at the start in the right proportions in the right places, and they will self-organize this structure, as opposed to approaches, for example, the Alatalo approach, which takes a decellularized organ or prints a cellular organ and then looks to try and find those cells somewhere and to regenerate some system artificially like that. So the synthetic side of this is the synthesis of each of these progenitors that actually then leads to a very natural process of kidney assembly that mirrors what goes on in every baby that's born.
And continuing off of that, one of the, obviously the kidney is a complex it's not like skin, a very, very complex 3-dimensional organ. And if this is confidential stuff, please, we don't have to go into it. But when it comes to sort of the 3-dimensionality of it and the all of the, and obviously this is all in your extensive publication record in terms of shape and size control and all the things that naturally make sure that my kidney is a certain size. It doesn't come out the size of a watermelon and is square. Can you say anything about that? Because I know that's always been sort of one of the critical components of moving from simple tissues to really these very complex structures.
It's a very good question. I think I'll ask to put that on my next exam. So the kidney is very complex in shape, but we have to ask, does it need to be? So when you make something in the evolutionary process, you're building on the constraints that were set in place before when you evolved novelty, like the novelty of making a structure like a kidney. So some ways we tend to think that this is actually the ultimate successful organization because evolution has produced it. But in actual fact, it may not be. It may be a bit of a Heath Robertson structure. And that we could maybe simplify that with a few tweaks and twists in our engineering process. And that's what we think can happen. So we can use the general principles by which this structure develops during embryonic and fetal life, but we can add new constraints to that to make it actually a much simpler organization and still be able to carry out its functions very effectively. And I think that is a very critical aspect about what we're thinking about in this project.
And I have to tell you, Ira, as a layperson, to when we first heard about this, the idea of going from a kidney in a dish, so to speak, created from stem cells, from human stem cells, and then being able to put that into a human being where it will grow from a small size to become something that can function at a certain level that would be perhaps equal to or superior, in fact, to dialysis. This was an incredibly exciting thing. And again, as a layperson, to go down to the lab and see Dr. Lee, he is a genius, no doubt about it. And to see already what he's got going with these organoids and sort of mini versions of this that are continuing to be engineered up and be able to see them almost in an incubator in a little petri dish. They look like little dots, but you can look at them under a microscope, and there is the beginnings of this thing that could impact literally millions of people.
And just to say something about the target here, Ira. So we're not trying to make a kidney that has the same functions as your kidney. I mean, the estimates are from the medical experts that if we can provide a kidney that can give 15% of kidney function, that's going to be sufficient to keep a very large number of those elderly patients off dialysis and to live out, a normal life at the end of their lives. And that's sort of our initial target. So, of course, that's a lot more realistic to ask to produce 15% of something than 100% of something. Sure. But that 15% will have immense value.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I'm glad you brought that up. And, we sort of, I remember that fact from a little while ago, but it's an extremely important piece that you can, create interventions, patches, whatever you might want to call the sort of the product that comes out much earlier than, having the full functional organ. That's great. A couple other things, Andy, I just wanted to, because, again, looking through your papers, in the process of where we are today to that, let's say 15% organ, what maybe there's other things that spin off of this. I mean, you've published on using the organoids, drug screening tools. I think you're doing some work, polycystic kidney disease models. And also you're studying the secretome of these materials, sort of again, the biochemical language that these various cells, the parasites and the epithelium and so forth secrete, part of the regenerative equation, but also interested in, potentially studying these types of materials as drugs themselves or biologics or other tools. Can you say a few words about those two parts of your program?
Yes. So the ultimate goal, I sort of equate it as the mission to Mars is to generate this functional kidney. But along the route, there are very important landmark steps along that route. And so making these progenitors and the potentials of these progenitors themselves has powerful therapeutic implications. And I'll give you two very different examples.
Sure.
So one example is this disease that you mentioned, autosomal dominant polycystic kidney disease. And this accounts for around 8 million people in the world who lose kidney function. This is the most common dominant genetic disease in the human population. And very simply, instead of these nice long tubes doing their normal stuff, great cysts develop and kidneys become huge and non-functional and have to be removed. So we can now use these stem cell-based systems that we use to generate kidney structures to actually model this cystic disease. And we can use that as a screening platform to try and find drugs that can block disease progression in that model. So that's one example.
Excellent.
And because we are along the route generating functional cell types for different parts of the kidney, and each of those parts is associated with its own specific diseases that are not just diseases of the whole organ, but diseases of individual cell types, we can model each of those diseases and look for therapeutic interventions for specific diseases with specific cells. So the other example is that for many years, people have talked about sort of an intermediate between dialysis and actual kidney replacements, where they've talked about something called a renal assist device.
Okay.
And the way that device is viewed, it's sort of a hybrid between a dialysis process, which is sort of a physical membrane, acellular, no cells, and certain cell types from the kidney that are particularly important for kidney function. And a cell type here is a cell type called the proximal tubule. And in developing these devices, the problem that people have had is finding proximal tubule cells to be able to spearhead making this device. The only cells that they could get were actually from donated cadavers kidneys. From somebody died, they donated their kidney, and they would remove these cells. But that's obviously not a long-term solution. And the clinical trials have been really not very strong because they never really had a strong source of those cells. So if we know how to make that one cell type, and this is a particular interest of another colleague at USC collaborating with Zhongwei Li, and that's Niels Lindstrom, the proximal tubule cell. If we know how to make that cell type at scale, now we can push forward this renal assist device area as being, again, maybe that's a step to the moon on the way to the trip to Mars.
Absolutely. No, I think that's extremely important, especially for the audience to understand that there's a lot that comes off of this that it's extremely valuable in addressing these different unmet medical needs along the way. So no, I extremely much appreciate you mentioning that. Along those lines, and Andy and you could tag team on this one. One of the guests that we profiled on the show, it was from the Dean Kamen's group up in New Hampshire, running this Advanced Regenerative Manufacturing Institute. Now, I know we're not at the stage yet where Andy and Dr. Lee are going to be, millions of kidneys are ready to come off the line, but any interesting stuff going on sort of the scale up thoughts? Obviously it's early, but at the end of the day, you need to make millions of these at some point. Anything interesting going on that front that you could talk about?
Well, at this point, I think we know enough to be very confident in the cells that Zhongwei has been generating and the need to figure out how to scale up these cells, because there's enough practical utility that we know in these cells now. So actually, we're looking at this time to see how we would spin this out of academia and move this into a setting where we can scale up the production of things we already know, whilst Zhongwei and Niels and myself and others can spearhead the next phase of moving this along. So that's sort of how things work well, with academia sort of spearheading things, and in the wake, the outside of academia, the process is being locked down, scaled up, manufacturing, perfected, and all of those things. And so we're looking to do that actually right now.
right? And just to add a little bit, Zhong Wei's lab, as I understand it, and Andy, again, please correct me if I'm wrong, but they are able to produce the sort of best version of progenitor cells, the most and the best, and that is why this kind of collaboration is so promising at USC, along with the others. There are others. It's a cross collaborative effort at USC. But Andy is always very conservative in terms of the way that he casts things, so that we don't make promises that we can't keep, kind of. Well, so that when he said, this is the place to do it, these are the people who can do it, gave all of us at UKRO incredible confidence that this is a project to focus on, the project really for us to focus our resources on.
And actually, to speak to what Lewis said, I think this is a really good illustration of, why certain things have to be moved out of academia at a certain point. So Zhong Wei has a great protocol for making these cells, and this works really well in our labs. But it might actually not be the best way. But there's no incentive in our business to find the best way. Right. Nobody's going to fund us to be able to do that. What they'll fund us to do is to find the next thing forward in the process that we can find out about the properties of these cells in a way that advances things. But that industry is looking for the best way. They're looking for the speediest, the highest percentage, the lowest costs. It's interested in perfecting process. Right. And so that's the sort of thing that would go on outside of academia.
Right. Lewis, what obviously, in addition to Andy's project, well, the various components of the synthetic kidney project and the other tools and technology that spin off it, you're also funding a variety of other things that are looking sort of holistically at the kidney patient. I mean, you're looking at interesting targets for hypertension, diabetic kidney disease, renal tubular acidosis during kidney failure. Say a few words about some of these programs, if you would, while we have.
Well, honestly, one of the real focuses of the folks in the Kidney Research Center, which we are partnered, we're partnered with USC, and it's based there. One of their true focuses is polycystic kidney disease. That's the major focus of Dr. Ken Hallows, who runs the KRC and is the chief of nephrology there. So a lot of it really has to do with trying to find new therapies for polycystic kidney disease, zeroing in on drugs that might be repurposed for that. That's kind of one of the major emphases at this moment.
Yeah, the repurposing theme has definitely become hot in recent years, and that's exciting that you're in there as well. What's to both of you? What's coming up for the rest of the year, Lewis, in terms of different initiatives and events per the foundation, and Andy, conferences, lectures, places that we can listen to you, potentially meet you. You can both take that one and any way you want.
Yeah, well, we're in the process of figuring out kind of what our next event is. We did one last year. COVID really was a difficult time for all charities in terms of their fundraising and ability to throw events. So we're cooking something up, a couple of salons and things like that. And then we'll be working on, I'm sure, another event dinner for next year. We have to get together as a board and figure that out in the next few months. And in the meanwhile, doing things like this and attempting to get the word out, via various publications and speaking to as many people as possible about the project, so that the general public and those who are potential investors can get involved with us.
Yeah, for me, that the major event of the year is always the American Society of Nephrology, which is sort of the major international meeting, which I think this year is maybe in Boston. I'm not quite sure. I'm spacing out where it is. But that's the meeting that brings together all the clinicians and scientists working in the kidney world, as well as patient advocate groups from across the world, to discuss perspectives from their point of view. I would say that if I could say something here that's, I think, quite important, since we're talking here from California, is that, in our state, we have the California Institute of Regenerative Medicine. This is phenomenal. And overall, the California Institute of Regenerative Medicine has received $8.5 billion worth of funding. But to my knowledge, I'm the only person that has been funded from CERN working on specifically the kidney.
Mm.
And so patient advocate groups in California, we have to get together, I think, and talk up the need for greater funding of our organ system.
Yeah, and it's very interesting when people don't know a lot about kidney disease, and when they almost universally, when you begin a conversation, somebody knows somebody. Right. This past year, Dr. Lee was honored at halftime of a football game. He was selected as the superhero of the game, in which the athletic department puts somebody up, whether it's a first responder, a teacher, or somebody, and Dr. Lee was selected. And when the introduction of Dr. Lee came sort of at the end of the first quarter, you never know how these things are going to be perceived. But his background was read, and the sort of chief aim of the project was explained over the loudspeaker to 60,000 people. And we had no idea what the reaction would be. But as soon as the notion of a kind of replacement for dialysis came across the Los Angeles Coliseum, the entire crowd stood up and applauded for him. And they said it was sort of the loudest applause that they had ever gotten for one of these things. And it was such a meaningful moment. I had doctors texting me from the game that they'd never seen anything like this, that the idea of people applauding, it's real. And when you can get the word out, a great deal of difference can be made.
Yeah, and it's amazing that the UKRO have done such a good job at getting the word out. And as Lewis says, we all are only a few steps away from somebody we know who's on dialysis. And the statistics for people going on dialysis are new are terrible. So they're worse from patients being treated for cancer. Half the people who go on to dialysis have less than a 5-year survival.
Yeah.
And it cuts across all communities. I mean, yeah. It's I read recently about a gymnast who's an Olympic gymnast, I believe in Alabama, who, so she gets kidney disease, and so does a lawyer in Los Angeles. And so does, so many, it just affects anybody across all socioeconomic measurements. And so this is something that we really have to tackle. And it's almost this invisible thing that hasn't had its big moments. That was what dawned on us when my father got sick, and then just said, hey, we've got to do something about this.
And the great thing is that our labs are training lots of people. They're going out from our labs. They're establishing their own research, different places around the world. And there is a snowball effect here. And I really do see that this next decade is going to be a decade where we're really going to make significant differences in kidney disease.
It's speaking of CERN for a moment, because I had Maria Milan on the show last year, and per your colleagues, around the world and folks you interface with, are there other models like that in terms of, specifically, I'll say a moonshot type funding situations as it pertains to regenerative medicine in other countries, things you might see that model recapitulated in? What's sort of in the wind?
Yes, so I think around the world, people are interested in similar approaches to this, but there's nowhere in the world that's invested like California has directly in exactly the approaches that we need to take here to build new kidney structures.
It's an amazing set of projects. Again, when I was reading about the organization and of course reading about your research, Andy, it just it popped out to me that this was definitely quite different and much more fundamental to sort of just the theme of regeneration than anything I've seen. And so I just really wish you and your team, Dr. Lee, the best of this. Obviously, Lewis, you and the charity, continue to spread the word and raise funding for these amazing approaches. And I'll do my best here to help spread it here. Any final messages from either of you? Anything that I missed that you might want to mention? Please both take the floor.
I just say from my part that if anybody wants to know more about what we're doing, please contact me. I'm a.mcmahon at med.usc.edu. You can find me pretty easily if you just do a Google search. I'm more than happy to chat with anybody to explain the processes that we're using. And very happy to talk with people who might want to invest in this area in our research.
Right. We're ukro.charity.org. And the same holds true, obviously. Our organization does nothing except raise money to fund the work of Dr. Lee and Andy and the people at the KRC. It's our whole goal. All of the money goes to that. We have almost no overhead or infrastructure. The money is for the purpose of finding these new therapies to save lives.
Outstanding. For everybody who is going to be listening to this particular episode of our show across the various podcast networks or watching on our YouTube channel, again, you've been listening to Lewis Kleinberg, board member, University Kidney Research Organization, and Dr. Andy McMahon, director, Eli and Edith Broad Center for Regenerative Medicine and Stem Cell Research, USC, provost professor, and inaugural holder of W.M. Keck Professorship in Stem Cell Biology and Regenerative Medicine. Andy, Lewis, I want to really thank you for taking the time out of your schedules to come talk about these important topics for a little while. Obviously, thank you for everything you both do. And as we like to say on our show, thanks for creating a better tomorrow for millions of people out there via what you do. Really a great story.
Thanks very much for taking the time to talk with us.
Thank you. Absolute pleasure.
Great having you.